Super excited to be here today. As said, I'm the public liaison for search. My work for the search team, my role is to kind of foster two-way communication with people externally and explain how our search systems work, and also bring that information back into our search team and figure out how we can better explain the ways things work or make improvements. Before that, I was actually a journalist. I ran 2 different publications covering search engines. And then before that, I was also a journalist for print newspapers. So I went to my clipbook, which kids is something we used to have before we had URLs, to find, your classics of someone grew a giant tomato, which was a story that I covered when I was an intern, or the things that you do with local, like what's going on with traffic, or the important stuff that we do with local, like covering earthquakes, or even, of course, wildfires like happen. So journalism and local journalism is very fundamental to me because that's sort of my roots, and I'm excited to talk to you about it and how it works with Google News today. So let's go to our slides, assuming that my little clicker works. All right. So we have different, what we refer to as news services with Google News. Your news briefing, Google News headlines. They're the top stories that you get when you do a regular Google search, and we'll show you a top stories area. And we also have what we call the news tab on search, where if you actually click on the little news link, you get all news content with it from there. To be eligible for most of these news services, including when someone does a keyword search, content is just automatically considered. So we have systems that try to figure out, oh, that looks like news to us. It looks like good news content. We should be considering it to show in various news services, as long as also the publishers have what we refer to as high levels of expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, that we understand there's a consistent history of producing original news content, and that the content is all complying with our news policies. And by the way, we're going to give you links to provide more information about all of this and some of the things I referred to in the slides as well. So we recently did a blog post explaining more about eligibility, and we'll get you a link to that as well. Now, some things to consider. One thing people always want to know is, well, how do I rank better? How do I ensure that my content shows up well or surfaces in front of people? And we look at a variety of things. Is the content relevant? Someone's entered some words, and is this content relevant to those words? That's sort of a core aspect, as you would expect. We try to understand the prominence of a news story, and that doesn't mean that the story is the biggest thing on the page, but we try to understand if there's a particular topic that's trending a lot, or a lot of people are referring to, and that would help us understand, for instance, if we're doing headlines, if we need to have clusters of stories about a particular aspect of a news story. We try to understand the authoritativeness of content and how solid it seems to be, freshness of content, the location, both of where the content is coming from and from someone doing a search that we're showing content that may be relevant to their location. And very related to that would be if the content is written in the language. So these are ranking factors. And we also have a page that explains this more, which we'll get you a link to. Another thing that we would like people to be aware of is the need for transparency. Transparency in and of itself isn't a ranking factor, but it can align with some of the things that our ranking systems try to understand when we try to figure out if content is authoritative. So doing these sorts of things is helpful. It's also what your readers are expecting, and it's also making sure that you're complying with our news policies. So, for instance, on an article level, we really want to see bylines. We want to know who's written an article, as your readers might want to do. And a tip to take away here is, if all your articles simply say by staff, that's not really the kind of transparency that we're looking for, and probably your readers are looking for. There are occasions when that makes sense, but a site-wide type of thing is probably not what you want to be doing. We definitely want to know a publish date. Make it very obvious to us, just like you would do to your readers, and you're doing all the right things. Information about the site itself. What's the purpose? What are your policies? What's your staff information, your business staff, so that people have an idea if you're local, where exactly are you, more local at? Non-generic contact information, and information if you're owned by a larger organization as to what network that you sort of belong to. These are all along of our transparency guidelines and principles. And again, we have a blog post that we did too explaining this more, which we'll get you a link to if you somehow missed that. So I went back and I talked with the people who are involved, the engineers, the search team, and like, well, what do you really wish that people would know even more about, especially on the local front? And one of the big messages that came back was be local. be proud about being local and make sure you're being local and that everybody understands that you're local. And that means emphasizing your local content. So for instance, if you're a local publication, a reader coming to you would expect to find local stories on your homepage. And we try to have our systems mirror what readers would tend to do. So we're expecting to see local stories. So if we came into a local publication and all your stories were syndicated international or national content like that, we might not understand some of the importance that you're placing on your local content. Using things like prominent headlines so that we can understand that this story seems to be visually important. We can figure that out in the same way that readers can, and helps us understand what seems to be an important thing for us to be picking up for you as well. Or making use of sitemaps that can allow us to understand the content that you want to prioritize. These things aren't necessarily ranking signals on their own. Just because you have a giant headline doesn't mean, wow, now that story will be number one. But it can align with the things that help us understand importance, and it all kind of contributes. Now, we asked for some questions beforehand, and there were no questions, so we'll just skip. Now, there are plenty of questions, obviously. We had a variety of questions, and so we'll go through some of those, and then we're going to do some live questions at the end of this, too. Does Google News consider a publication's brand over the content of an individual story, and how does a new publication attain that status? So we don't really understand brand. That's not something that we kind of have in mind. Oh, that's a big brand, do well. We try to understand what I mentioned before, the expertise, the authoritativeness, and trustworthiness of content, or what we refer to as EAT. So if you're meeting these types of things, and again, we have a blog post that will explain some of this in more detail if you're not familiar with the concept. If you're doing those sorts of things, that's what we're looking for. And if you're a new publication and you're doing all the kinds of things that build up your kind of reputation as you would in the real world over time, that equates and aligns very well with the kinds of signals that we see on the web that sometimes make no sense to a human being, but they correspond to the things that human beings like or would prefer. How does Google determine who's an authority on a topic? So, I'm not going to tap that enough there. So, as mentioned, we can understand sort of the authority of content, how authoritative articles seem to be, and we also can understand some broad notions of topics. Wow, that's sports. Wow, that's news, that type of thing. So, if you're a site that has a history of producing authoritative content in these particular topics, then you'll align well with the idea that we might start to recognize that you're an authority in those sorts of areas. How does AMP affect ranking and performance in search, and should a new publication implement AMP? So it's site speed and user experience that have an impact on ranking. Those are ranking factors. AMP itself is not a ranking signal. So just because you use AMP, we don't say, oh, okay, now you shoot up to the top of the page in all the rankings. It's just one of the ways that you can use to deliver a fast loading experience. So if you want to use it because it might be a very simple way for you to do that and increase your site speed, that's fine. If you have other ways that you want to use methods of increasing your site speed, then you can use those sorts of things as well. You definitely should be paying attention to ensuring that you have a site that's delivering fast loading content and that you're providing a really good user experience. That's one of the things we look at. It's not the ultimate thing. We use a whole basket of signals, and ultimately we're always trying to show the most relevant content we can. But if we have content that's rarely co-equal, then the content that has the good user experience and the site experience as part of that is something that we'll tend to do well. How are articles selected for Discover? So Discover is completely different from news. There's different systems that determine what to show and how to surface content there. It's also unique because there's no query that's being used. It's trying to understand general interests. And so any page that has high EAT, as I mentioned before, that's one of the things that can cause content to be considered for Discover. If you're thinking about it, it's content that we tend to focus on that is timely, focused on current events, tells stories well, has unique insights. Having compelling and high quality images can also perhaps increase the odds of appearing in Discover as well. And how can I tell if my site is set up well in search? We have two very good resources to tap into. There's Search Console. That's a free tool set we provide to anybody to use that can help you understand metrics of how we're interacting with your site, including feedback on content that's doing well, or if we're having issues perhaps indexing certain content. And then Search Central has a whole variety of help resources where there are blog posts that are happening, there are help pages that are happening. We have regular office hours where you can talk with Googlers about questions that you may have coming up about search. So just there's a lot of information out there that can help you. And now we are at the live Q&A. And I think I read the first ones of these and we go with it from there. So why national news publishers are trending instead of local publishers for local news. And I'm not certain if the person comes in on that with me or not now. I'm going to give it a beat and we'll wait. And if not, then I'm going to just go ahead and read and I'm going to respond with it from there. So for this first one, our goal is actually to make sure that we are surfacing local publications, and we've actually made a lot of improvements to try to get to that goal. There's always work that we can do to continue to grow and do better with that. But that really is the goal, that if there's a local story being published by a good local publisher, we want to ensure that that local publisher is surfacing well, because it's what people would expect. These are people in that area, and it's a good thing to be doing. So if you're finding that this is happening and you are a local publication and you're going, wow, we had the best story on this and it's in our area, and Google is still not surfacing us over, some national publication or whatever. I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter, and you can certainly call out to me, and it's very helpful if you do that in the time of the moment. And, if you want to be nice about it, cool. If you want to just complain about it, and that's fine. So I'll process it all the same. But what happens is I'll look for these kinds of reports. Other people from Google do as well. And if someone raises it, then we go back through and have a whole system. I'll go through and file it so we can take a look. And we can't immediately make a change. We don't make changes to particular publications or particular queries where we literally can't have our systems do that. But what we will try to understand is, well, why did that happen? And why didn't the local publication's story show up earlier? What's happening with our ranking signals that we didn't understand that? And then we look to see if we can improve how the systems work overall, so that going forward, maybe we get better from that. So those kinds of reports are really helpful. And you might not want to hit me with them every single day, but if you've got a really good example and you ping me about it, I'll certainly take a look. We really appreciate that kind of feedback. It is helpful to us. So now I'm going to go to the next one. And again, I think I'm just going to be reading these rather than people coming in live. But they are all live, coming at us live, which is why I'm going, what is that? We've had a problem with sites scraping our content and outranking us in Google News. I reported it several times, and other publishers have as well, but it's still happening. Are there better ways to report such things? And oh dear, and we're going to even name them too. So a bunch of things. Oh, by the way, let me go back. One thing on the national news publishers. One thing I'd like to encourage the national news publishers is that if you're covering a story and you're picking up from the local publications, please should refer to the local publications and provide a link back to them as well. Because it's a nice thing to do, and it helps our systems understand that there's local content. That's true of anything, by the way. If you're picking up a tip from another publication and you're going on, and even if you're going on to do your own original reporting, but you've picked up some aspects of it, citing the other publication, linking to the other publication, it's a polite thing to do. It's a good thing to do, and it's helpful for our system to understand as we try to understand original content out there. So on the scraping thing, a bunch of different things. It's probably not useful to hit me with all these things on Twitter, because then everybody tried to do that, and it just is not the scalable type of thing, and it'd get more reports that. We have a spam tool that you can use. You search for Google spam reporting, and you can report the spam like that, and we'll try to understand and how to improve our systems better. That's a good way of doing it. You can file what's called a DMCA request against the publication. And our systems, we go through the process, and then they'll remove the content. And I know that can feel like whack-a-mole, but if there's, and what I would say, and this is more a personal thing, is you can go out and constantly look for your content by searching for headline, a really long thing, and you'll find people maybe have copied it or done it like that. But that is not typically how users are searching. So typically users are searching for a few words, and in those cases, it may be that it's very unlikely that the scraped content is going to be coming up. So if you go out and try to find it, you may find it, but it might not really be having the impact that you think. You could still file the request if you want or not, but it's something that you decide on how you want to do with your resources. But if you are just doing an ordinary search like a user's doing, and you're seeing this content and it's showing that way, you're like, this is annoying. Well, it's annoying to us too as well. And so filing the DMCA request is helpful, because if we see a number of those sorts of things coming in against a particular organization and they're being upheld and they're all legitimate, that goes into our ranking systems and helps us better understand how to automatically not allow that kind of content from that place to show up again more in the future. You can also go to our Google News forums. That's a very appropriate place if you want to report that you've got some kind of scraping thing. You're just like, I need to do 3 different things. That's a third thing that you can do. So you can go into the forums, you can post it there. I would just be succinct and be very clear. Sometimes people go into the forums and there's long essays and there's long descriptions, and I can understand that from a personal level. I really can. But the thing that's helpful to us in forums is, what is the issue succinctly? What are the URLs that are involved? That type of thing. These things can be escalated on up into Google staff, and we can take a look at it more from there. So. Next question here, does the byline have to be in the text of the article, or could it be identified via the WordPress author field? Both are prominent. We really like to see it on the page. So I think that's suggesting that we might have the author name, but you wouldn't actually see it visually. We would like to see it visually, so make it visual. I've got a live person. Hello. Hi. So please introduce yourself and let me know your question, please.
Sure. Thanks, Danny. I'm Jeremy Gilbert. I'm Medill's Knight Chair for Digital Media Strategy at Northwestern University. And you've said a lot of important things for local publishers, local newsrooms to keep in mind. But can you share a little bit more about how you think we should elevate local and local news across different news services, and how publishers should think differently about what they can do to optimize for that while still being news gatherers?
Sure, and thank you for the question. I think a lot of it goes back to what I said earlier, which is be local. So, you're already local publications, you're covering local, but making sure that you're getting your local content out there, that you're being very prominent with it in your own publications. I think that's important, so that people can understand that that's happening. If you're taking in a lot of syndicated content, because you may very well be doing that, you may be the publication that people are turning to in your community, not just for local, but they're depending on you for national and international as well. That's all good, but there are ways that you can restrict us from crawling the international and syndicated content if you're finding that we don't seem to be getting to maybe your local content as well. Whenever we come into a publication or any kind of a site, we have sort of a limited amount of time we can crawl through that, because if we tried to hit you with everything, then we would just bring your site to its knees. So helping us understand what's important by telling us we don't need to pick up other things, that's another thing that you can do as well. So I think beyond that, I think it's just maybe it's not on our surfaces, but if you're sharing the news about what you're doing, of course, on social surfaces and whatnot, we start to understand if people are making references, not so much on the social channels, but people hear about social and then they may write their own stories and they may link over to it. And we understand a lot about what's going on with links, so that's helpful to us as well. So hopefully those are some tips that'll help with it there. Thank you. If someone prefers to read news in Spanish and they use Google in English, how can we make our Spanish language content discoverable to them in search? That's like a difficult question, because if they prefer to read their news in Spanish, but they're searching on Google in English, we're going to take that probably as a sign that they're looking for English language content, which is usually a reasonable thing for us to do. You can have settings in Google so that you can search and say in your settings that you speak both languages or multiple languages, and we can understand that as well. But it's still going to be one of the most powerful things we understand in terms of the signal is the language that's being used. So if the query is all in Spanish, we're going to tend to prefer content that's all in Spanish. So I would say the best thing for you to do is, to continue to publish both in English and Spanish, and understand that, you're going to be reaching people, in those languages primarily based on what they're searching. But maybe you could, within the Spanish language article, or maybe within the English language article, make a note that you have the same article, if you're not already doing this, written in Spanish. That might cause someone who's come into your article in English to understand that you have the Spanish language version. And then maybe in the future, they might start feeling more comfortable just searching in Spanish, even for news, and knowing that they'll find that kind of content out there. In our rural market, our content is not ranking on Google News, but national and larger publications, nearby cities rank. How come? Because we probably need to get better. As I said, we have made a lot of changes to try to improve how we're doing with local content, but there's more that we can do with it from there. So this is a case, like I said, that if you want to post it into our forums, it's really helpful to have a type of thing. Or honestly, you can call out to me and on Twitter, and if I see something like that, I usually try to go through and get that out there as well to see how we can improve it. It really is a goal to make that happen. It just can be difficult because you have the publications and then everybody jumps on a story, and then we have all sorts of signals, and we'll understand, oh, well, this also seems to be relevant to that as well. Let's see. And I did the byline type of one. Do we need to replicate our ownership information on all story pages, or just a page about page? Just so, in terms of transparency, no, every story does not have to have the biology and history and taxonomy of your ownership structure at the bottom of the page. It is really helpful if you have an about page that explains what readers would expect. This is our publication. This is who owns the publication. This is what the publication is trying to do. If you're trying to contact us, here are ways that you can do it in a reasonable manner. So you don't need to have that on every page. It is useful if people can easily locate your about page. And go with it from there. Let's see. I'm trying to look at the ones that are voted a lot. How is it our articles perform well in search queries on Google Search, but they don't show up in Google News, where it should be the opposite? We'd face much less competition in Google News and Google Search. And then Google Search will show irrelevant stories from France, or very old, less relevant stories from major Quebec publications. So this may be a case, again, where we need to improve. So things I've said before, if you see examples like that, you can call out, or in our forums is also helpful, or you can do both of them too. It's always great too. Someone says, by the way, I've put this into the forum, but here I'm alerting you to it, because then you're double dipping, and that's totally fine in a good way. But it's probably a case where we need to improve, but not necessarily always. It could be that in some cases your content isn't eligible for Google News, right? For whatever reason, it hasn't picked up. So that's one reason it might be happening. I don't get the impression that's the case from the person asking that question. It sounds like you probably are eligible. You're just finding the systems aren't rewarding as well enough. So it just may be a case that we need to try to improve more if we can from there. I'm going to do this one here that's up at the top. Publication without a photographer. We've gone back and forth about it, but we rely on monthly freelancers or print journalist picks. So basically, how much does photography help? Should you invest in a photographer? That's really a business decision I can't kind of get into. We do like to understand if content has images around it. Readers like to have images. We're in a much more image visual world than we were when I first started doing things online, which I did over 20 years ago. Images were like an alien thing, but I learned that you kind of have to do them. So it may not be that you have to invest in your photographer, but maybe find other ways that you could bring images in that are relevant in a way that fits with the business models you can do. Okay, I'm going to do lightning around here, try to get through everybody. Smaller publications, how do you compete with bigger and established ones? Just be good. Oh no, just be good. But no, really, focus on doing what you do well, which is local. Build up your reputation in terms of that. And that is really the right path that you should be on. We will try to continue to improve our system to make sure we're matching with that, but that is where we're aiming to do as well. So if you're doing that, you're on the same path with us as we should be doing. Oh, and I don't have any more questions, so they've taken that away from me. So because we're at the end of time, we've got 30 seconds or so. So with that, I think I was supposed to bring us to the end of our slide, and I'm not certain who I'm going to next, but I'm certain if you will welcome whoever's coming up next on our next talk. Again, thank you so much for being here today, especially in this world where we're doing things virtually. I'm glad we could all at least get together in this sort of way. So be safe and all the best with you all, and thank you for your time.